First thing Mira Solis noticed about the Vethkai station master was that he had too many fingers. Not in a horrifying way, not at first. 11 per hand, slender as reeds, moving in constant overlapping patterns, the way some people drum their knuckles when they're nervous. She'd been watching him for 6 minutes, through the reinforced viewport of the intermodal hub on Callista Station, and he hadn't stopped moving those fingers once. He was reading something, or composing something. Maybe that was just how they thought. Processing the universe through those constant liquid gestures, the way a human might tap a pencil or chew the end of a stylus while working through a problem. She'd been told to expect cultural differences. She had not been told to expect them to be beautiful. Mira pulled her attention back to the briefing board. 10 minutes until the Helix Express departed from Base 7. 411 passengers, 11 crew. The longest single-track maglev line in the outer settled territories, running on rails that humans had laid through the Cassini Corridor 20 years ago before anyone knew the Vethkai were watching. The train was called the Cassini Helix, and it was the fastest thing on a rail in 3 sectors. It was also, as of 42 seconds ago, completely unresponsive to remote command. She keyed her comm. Phoenix lead, this is Solis. I've got a cold board on Bay 7. Confirm, static. Then confirm, Solis. All override channels are jammed. We think it's active countermeasure, not malfunction. We think. Mira Solis was the field commander of the Global Rescue Initiative's Rapid Response Wing. Call sign Phoenix. Ground Force designation RW1. She was 31 years old. She had a scar that ran from her left earlobe to the corner of her jaw from a tunnel collapse in the Meridian floods of 47. She had a habit of rolling a coin across her knuckles when she was running the math on something, and she was running the math on this right now. 411 people, 1 train, 1 hostile actor. The name on the briefing was Dor Malvin, former structural engineer, specialist in electromagnetic load-bearing systems, employed by the Vethkai Transit Authority, until 8 years ago when the authority rejected his prototype for the Cassini line in favor of human-designed maglev architecture. He had filed 19 formal objections. Then he'd gone quiet. Then, apparently, he'd found different allies. Tell me about the other train, she said. Her second Kyra Voss was already at the auxiliary board, pulling thermal scans. Kyra was 26, compact, with the kind of stillness that made people underestimate her until they saw her work. She had been playing music off her earpiece 30 seconds ago. Something with a fast rhythm. Something she only put on when she was nervous, and she'd clicked it off the moment the cold board alert came through. The secondary contact is a Vethkai industrial hauler, Kyra said, a modified. The thermal signature is wrong for its listed cargo. It's running about 12 kilometers behind the Helix in the same corridor. Modified how? Modified in every way that matters. Kyra paused. The electromagnetic output from that hauler is consistent with a wide-spectrum rail lock system. Something that can handshake with the Helix's own controls and take over guidance. Can it? It already has. Kyra looked up. Helix isn't running on its own track algorithm anymore. It's running on whatever that hauler is broadcasting. Mira let that settle for exactly 2 seconds. Then she was moving. The Global Rescue Initiative had been humanity's answer to a question no one had formally asked. What do you do when the universe gets big enough that disasters stop being local? When a flood isn't a city problem but a corridor problem, when a collapse isn't a mine issue but a trade lane issue, when the thing killing people is moving at 300 kilometers per hour through territory that 3 different species have overlapping claim to. You build something fast. You build something adaptable, and you fill it with people stubborn enough to not ask permission before they run into the building. The Phoenix Wing has 6 field units. Mira had 3 with her today, herself, Kyra, and a third team member named Darak, who was currently in the maintenance bay, doing something creative with the undercarriage of their pursuit vehicle, and humming to himself at a volume that suggested he had not yet heard about the cold board. She told him. He stopped humming. How far ahead is the Helix? 40 kilometers and accelerating. She was already pulling on her tactical vest. Malvin's hauler has boosted the track speed past the rated maximum. The Helix is doing 410 right now. By the time we reach the Cassini gap, it'll be doing 520. Derek looked at her. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, patient brown eyes, and the specific kind of calm that comes from having been very afraid many times and having learned to function inside it. And the gap is rated for 300. He nodded slowly. So when the train hits the gap collapses. The train goes into the ravine. She held his gaze. 411 people. He nodded again, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear, exactly. More like the thing that comes before decision, the thing that closes the door on alternatives. How long do we have? 22 minutes. He looked at the pursuit vehicle. He looked at Mira. He looked back at the vehicle. I was doing something creative with the undercarriage, he said. I know. It's going to make this faster, or it's going to make this explode. I know that too. He picked up his tools. Get in. The Cassini corridor was carved through the basalt flank of a mountain range that had no human name yet. The Vethkai called it something that translated roughly as the place where weight lives, which was as accurate as poetry got. The rail line ran along a shelf cut from living rock, the mountain face on the left, and a drop on the right that the survey reports described as significant, and that every field officer who'd ever driven this stretch described as other words entirely. At speed, in a pursuit vehicle that Dirac had optimized in ways that were either brilliant or catastrophic, the corridor felt like being fired from a cannon through a very narrow tube. Mira drove. Kyra tracked. Dirac in the back was doing something with a frequency modulator and a piece of equipment that was not technically on the GRI-approved inventory list. He's going to see us coming, Kyra said. He'll see the Phoenix signature. Mira held the vehicle through a curve that pressed all three of them sideways in their harnesses. He won't see what we're transmitting. Are we transmitting something? Dirac. From the back. Almost the Vethkai had not technically sanctioned this operation. The transit authority was aware of the situation. Mira had sent the notification the moment the cold board came through. But the authorities' emergency response structure involved 17 levels of jurisdictional confirmation, and 17 levels of jurisdictional confirmation took time that 411 people did not have. So Mira had made a decision, the kind of decision that would either earn her a commendation or get her license pulled, depending entirely on whether it worked. And she had taken her team into the corridor without authorization. This was not the first time. What's the gap at? She asked. She'd started rolling the coin again, without realizing it. 21 meters across, 260 meters to the valley floor. Kyra's voice was flat and professional. At the projected speed of impact, the debris field would be, don't. Right. What I need to know is whether the gap structure has any anchoring systems. Anything we can access from the rail shelf. Kyra was quiet for a moment, working her board. There are emergency braking pylons every 800 meters along the corridor. They're rated for standard emergency stops, designed to catch a runaway before it reaches the gap. But they're mechanical. They won't engage while the hauler's signal is overriding the track system. Unless the track system isn't receiving the hauler's signal anymore. Kyra looked at her. Dirac, Mira said. I know, he said. I know, almost. The plan, such as it was, had 3 stages. In stage 1, Dirac would use the modified frequency modulator to broadcast a mirrored signal pattern on the hauler's control frequency, not jamming it, echoing it back at a phase offset that would create destructive interference at the Helix's receiver array. If it worked, the Helix's own guidance system would come back online for approximately 90 seconds before Mailvan could compensate. In stage 2, Kyra would use those 90 seconds to transmit an emergency braking command through the GRI's independent rail access channel, a channel that existed specifically for this kind of situation, and that the Vethkai Transit Authority had never actually believed would need to be used. In stage 3, they would not go into the ravine. Stages 1 and 2 were engineering problems. Dirac and Kyra were engineers. Stage 3 was a hope. He's going to see the phase offset, Kyra said. The moment our signal registers on his board, he'll know what we're doing. How long to compensate? For a standard operator, maybe 90 seconds. Someone who designed the override system himself and has been living with it for 8 years. She paused. 60, maybe less. Can you issue the braking command in 60 seconds? I can issue it in 20. Then we need 40 seconds of buffer. Kyra looked at her. Shh. How do you get 40 seconds of buffer against a man who knows his own system better than anyone alive? Mira had been thinking about this since the moment the cold board came through. She'd been thinking about Dor Malvan, the engineer, the man who'd spent 8 years watching his design get replaced. Watching the Cassini line get built with someone else's architecture. Watching every train that ran on those rails prove that his vision had been discarded. She'd been thinking about what that does to a person. Not the rage. She understood rage. Everyone understood rage. But the specific texture of the grief underneath it. Grief of a maker who watches his making get unmade. She'd read the 19 formal objections, all of them. In the 14th one, Malvan had noted a specific flaw in the human maglev architecture, a resonance issue in the gap-crossing pylons that his own design had solved and that the human design had never fully addressed. He'd been right. The pylon engineers had acknowledged it in a technical footnote 3 years later, by a partial correction. Melvin had never been notified. We tell him about the pylons, Mira said. Kyra stared at her. We talk to him. We tell him the objection was correct. We tell him the human design had the flaw he identified, and we tell him the correction that was applied. And we tell him it's only partial. And we tell him that if his train hits the gap at current speed, the pylons will fail catastrophically in a way he didn't account for. Because he was working from the original specs, not the modified ones. Is that true? I don't know. She held the vehicle through another curve, but he'll have to calculate it. And calculation takes time. Silence in the vehicle. Then Darek, from the back. That's either the smartest thing I've ever heard or the cruelest. It's both. Mira reached for the comm. Darek, tell me when you're ready. 90 seconds. Kyra, prep the braking command. Prepped. And someone. She paused, steadying the vehicle as the corridor narrowed. Someone find me a comm channel that can reach that hauler. Kyra worked her board in silence for a moment. I've got a Vethkai emergency broadcast frequency. Transit authority emergency only. It'll ping every receiver in the corridor, including his. Use it, Mira, use it. Another silence then. Open. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't hesitate. She spoke in the flat, professional tone that she used for incident reports and safety briefings in every other situation where the stakes were high enough that emotion became noise. Dor Malvan. This is Commander Mira Solis of the Global Rescue Initiative. I've read your technical objections to the Cassini maglev architecture. All 19 of them. Section 14, regarding resonance failure in gap-crossing pylons under high-velocity load conditions. You were correct. I need to tell you something about what they did with that. Static. The corridor blurred past on both sides. They applied a correction in year 3 of operation. It's documented in Technical Amendment 7C, which was never formally circulated to objection filers. The correction addressed the primary resonance frequency, but not the harmonic secondary. At speeds above 450 kilometers per hour, the gap pylons will experience secondary resonance collapse approximately 4 seconds for the crossing. At the speed your train is currently traveling, she checked Kyra's board. 508 kilometers per hour, the collapse will be instantaneous. The passengers you want to kill will die, yes. But so will the train. And the architecture you hated will be blamed. And the inquiry will find the flaw. And the transit authority will have to admit that your objection was correct and that they never told you about the partial fix. Engineering will be vindicated. She let that sit for a moment. Or, she said, you can let me stop it. The corridor opened slightly. Ahead, just visible in the thermal scan, she could see the blaze of the Helix Express. A comet of white heat against the dark stone walls, moving fast. Nothing wrong. The comm crackled. You're lying. The voice was precise, structured, carrying the particular cadence of Vethkai formal speech, even in distress. Syllables weighted differently than human speech. Pauses in unexpected places. The GRI has no access to transit authority technical amendments. We have a liaison with the authority's safety office. She did. She'd used it twice. And we have an engineer in our back seat who ran the secondary resonance calculation in the last 4 minutes. She glanced in the rear view. Dirac looked up from his modulator and gave her a slightly terrified expression. She looked forward again. He says you were right. He says the numbers don't hold at 510. Another pause, longer this time. Darak, she said quietly, now would be good. It's ready. Whenever. Kyra, command is staged. Ready to transmit on your mark. The comm crackled again, Melvin's voice. Slightly different now, not softer, but denser, like something calculating. If the secondary resonance is as you describe, activate the modulator, said, her voice still level, her eyes on the thermal bloom ahead.
Kyra, transmit.
3 things happened in the space of 6 seconds. Modulator went live, and the interference pattern hit the hauler's control signal like a stone thrown into still water. Not breaking it, bending it, folding the transmission back on itself at an offset that created a momentary silence in the Helix's receiver array. The Helix's own guidance system blinked back online, confused, searching. Kira transmitted the emergency braking command through the GRI independent channel. 20 characters of protocol, the digital equivalent of pulling a very specific lever, and the Helix's own system, suddenly back in control of itself, received it and did what it was designed to do. And Melvin, on his hauler, realizing what was happening and reaching for his override controls, paused. Just for a moment. Just long enough for the secondary resonance calculation to finish running in whatever part of him was still an engineer, before it was anything else. And for that part to find an answer he didn't expect. Brakes engaged at 287 kilometers per hour. Even then it was close. The Helix's emergency deceleration system had not been designed to stop a train moving at nearly 3 times its rated corridor speed, and the friction bloom was visible from 11 kilometers away. A white-orange streak along the rail that lit the stone walls like a second sunrise. Mira held the pursuit vehicle steady as the thermal signature ahead of them slowed. Cassini Gap was 2.4 kilometers ahead when the Helix stopped. She let out a breath. One slow, even breath. Just the one. Phoenix lead. This is Solus. Helix Express is stationary. Passengers are secure. Requesting Vethkai Transit Authority emergency teams to the corridor. Kilometer 44. The response came in 17 seconds, which was either a record or a sign that someone in the authority had been watching. She pulled the vehicle to a stop at the side of the corridor shelf and sat for a moment with her hands still on the controls and the stone walls. Close on both sides in the distant glow of the Helix's braking scorch ahead of her. The coin was in her palm. She didn't remember picking it up. Kyra had taken out her earpiece again, and the music was playing, quiet enough that Mira could only catch the rhythm. Fast, syncopated, the kind of thing that propelled rather than soothed. You want to know if it was true? Darak asked from the back. The secondary resonance thing? Particularly. It wasn't. I mean, the math is real, but the numbers were projections. I was working from incomplete specs and I made some assumptions that Darak. Yeah, 411 people are alive. A pause. Right, he said. Right. Yeah. They sat in the corridor while the Vethkai emergency teams began arriving, their vehicles a different shape than human ones, wider, lower, moving in precise coordinated formations that looked like choreography. The station master Mira had watched through the viewport was apparently leading the response himself, and she could see his 11-fingered hands moving constantly through the feed from the corridor cameras, directing traffic, organizing the passenger offload with a kind of fluid precision that was nothing like how humans organized anything, and was somehow more efficient for it. Mail Van's hauler had gone to manual the moment the braking command hit the Helix. He'd reversed course and was running south on the secondary track. 3 Vethkai enforcement vehicles were already in pursuit, and the corridor's automated systems, functioning normally now that the override frequency had been interrupted, had sealed the junction ahead of him. He wasn't going anywhere. She watched the passenger offload begin through the thermal feed, tiny shapes moving away from the long white body of the Helix, carefully, slowly. The way 400 people move when the thing that was almost a disaster has just finished, almost being won. 2 shapes broke from the group and moved toward each other. One of them was smaller. They stood together for a long moment. Mira looked away. She had filed 19 formal objections of her own over the years. Not to transit authorities, to the GRI's command structure, to the oversight committee, to the 3 successive directors who'd told her that the Phoenix Wing's cross-jurisdiction operations were creating diplomatic complications. She had objected to the response protocols that required 17 levels of confirmation. She had objected to the budget cuts that had reduced the wing from 12 units to 6. She had objected to the ruling that had classified cross-species technical collaboration as a security concern and restricted her liaison access to one contact in the Vethkai safety office, one contact who had nonetheless given her the information she needed when she needed it. None of the objections had been formally acknowledged. She was beginning to understand something about Dor Melvin that she wished she didn't. "He's going to lose," Kyra said quietly. She was watching the same feed, in the inquiry. Whatever his grievance was, however right he was about the pylons, what he did today ends him. "I know. Does that bother you?" Mira turned the coin over in her fingers. "Bothers me," she said. "Is that someone sat on a correct technical objection for 8 years and never told him?" Kyra didn't say anything to that. "Get me the full file on Technical Amendment 7C, Mira said. "Whatever they actually found. Whatever they actually fixed. I want to know if the Casinite gap pylons are rated for what's running on this line. That's a transit authority jurisdiction, I know. We'd need a formal request through the Oversight Committee, which would take. Get me my liaison." Kyra picked up the comm. The Vethkai station master appeared on the passenger manifest under a name that Mira 3 attempts to pronounce correctly, and she eventually just used his title. He came to the cordon line 2 hours after the incident. When the passenger offload was complete and the forensic teams were going through the Helix's command systems, and he stood across from Mira, instant fingers in motion, and looked at her with eyes that were the specific amber color of old light through glass. "You acted with authorization," he said. "Yes. The authority's emergency confirmation protocol would have taken 40 minutes. She held his gaze. "I had 22. He was quiet for a moment. The fingers moved, slower now, a different pattern. Something she read, without being able to explain how she read it as consideration. "The GRI's independent braking channel," he said. "We were not aware you had access to that system. It's in the original corridor sharing agreement. Appendix D. Most people don't read that far. Most people," he said, "do not." Something shifted in the amber eyes. The engineer, Melvin, his objection. 14. You read them. All 19. She paused. "The pylons. Was the secondary resonance correction applied or not?" The station master's fingers slowed almost to stillness. That, she was certain, was not his resting state. "Technical Amendment 7C, he said, address the primary resonance frequency. The secondary was determined to be within acceptable operational parameters at rated corridor speeds." He paused. "The current corridor speed rating is 300 km/h per hour, and the Helix was doing 510. Yes. So, at 510. At 510, the secondary resonance would have been a concern." He met her eyes. Melvin's calculation was not incorrect. In that scenario, Mira looked at him for a long moment. "That information needs to be in a report." "Yes, a formal report, with Melvin's name on the findings." The fingers began moving again, a new pattern, quicker, more complex. "You are requesting that the authority formally acknowledge a 23-year-old technical objection from an individual who this morning committed act of." "I'm requesting that the authority formally acknowledge a correct engineering finding," Mira said. "What Melvin did with that finding is separate. What the authority did or didn't do with his objection is also separate. The finding itself was correct, and the people on this rail line deserve to know that." The silence between them held for several seconds. Through the cordon, the Helix sat on the track, in the late light its braking scorched stripe along the rail behind it. The physical record of close this had been. "You filed 19 objections yourself," the station master said. She looked at him. "How do you know that?" "We are aware of the Phoenix Wing's operational record." The amber eyes were steady. 7 of those objections concerned cross-jurisdiction response protocols. 3 concerned the Wing's budget authorization. 2 concerned the classification of cross-species technical collaboration. A pause. All 19 were formally received. None were formally acknowledged. She said nothing. "The director of the authority has asked me to convey," the station master continued, "that in light of today's events, the cross-jurisdiction protocol for emergency rail operations in the Cassini corridor is being formally suspended, pending review." Your wing's independent channel access will not be revoked. And the technical amendment file on Cassini pylon architecture will be forwarded to the inquiry panel with a recommendation for full disclosure. Mira looked at him. The director, he added, also wishes to convey that reading the full text of a formal agreement, including appendices, is considered in Vethkai administrative culture an act of significant respect. She almost smiled. Appendix D. Appendix D. She looked out at the rail line. The corridor stretched away in both directions, the mountain face on one side, the drop on the other, and between them, this narrow shelf of human engineering running through Vethkai territory, which was itself running through territory that hadn't had a name from anyone until someone started needing to get from one place to another. And built a road. That was how it always went. Someone built a road, and then someone else built faster roads, and then the roads meant things that hadn't been connected before, and then the complicated business of living next to each other began. She'd been told to expect cultural differences. She had not expected them to file formal objections. Darroch was leaning against the pursuit vehicle when she came back, eating something from a foil packet with the specific focused attention of a man who has decided not to think about how hungry he's been for the last 3 hours until the moment he's allowed to. He looked up. Debriefing? Tomorrow. She leaned against the vehicle side. Him. The corridor air was cool and had the mineral smell of the basalt, stone that had been here, east, long before rails or trains or the particular argument about which species had designed the better maglev architecture. The secondary resonance thing, he said. I've been running the actual numbers, and Melvin was right. He folded the foil packet carefully, a habit from field protocols. No debris in the operational area, even when the operation was over. The authorities' partial fix gets you to about 4:30, maybe 4:40 before the harmonic becomes a real issue. And he shook his head. It would have been very bad. Catastrophic? Depends how you define catastrophic. He looked at the helix, still sitting on the track in the distance. The train would have made the gap crossing. Probably. The pylons would have started resonating on the far side. The crossing structure would have begun to fail about 45 seconds later. He paused. 45 seconds at the speed they were doing puts the train about 6 kilometers past the gap. 6 kilometers past the gap was the approach to Waypoint Station. Waypoint Station had, on a normal operating day, approximately 900 people in it. Mira stood with that for a while. He didn't know, Darroch said quietly. Melvin. He wasn't trying to hit the station. He was trying to destroy the train and the gap structure. Make a point about the architecture. I know. The thing he actually would have done was worse than what he planned to do. Yes. Darroch was quiet for a moment. Does he know that? He will. She pushed off from the vehicle. The inquiry panel will have the full numbers. They stood in the corridor as the light shifted. The sun dropping somewhere behind the mountain range with no human name. The shadows of the stone walls lengthening across the rail line until the whole corridor was in shade. Somewhere in the offloaded passenger group, someone had started playing music from a portable speaker. Something with a fast rhythm. Something that propelled rather than soothed. Kyra came around the front of the vehicle. She'd been on the comm for the last 20 minutes, running the post-incident report with Phoenix lead. She looked tired in the specific way that came from high-stakes arithmetic. Not physical exhaustion, but the particular depletion of having run, numbers that mattered. Inquiry convenes in 48 hours, she said. Phoenix Wing is listed as a primary witness. She paused. Also listed. Technical Objection File 14, Vethka Transit Authority versus Mailvan D. Formal entry into the inquiry record. Mira nodded. Phoenix Lead also wants me to tell you that the operation is being classified as an unauthorized cross-jurisdiction action pending review. Kyra met her eyes, which means you are technically in trouble. I know. Objection 20, Kyra said. Mira looked at her. That's what I'd call it, Kyra said. If you're keeping count. The music from the passenger group was still playing. Mira could see, in the thermal feed on Kyra's wrist display, the shapes of people moving around each other, organizing, resting, finding the specific configurations of other people that helped them process the fact of a close call. A small shape and a larger shape were still standing together, the way they'd been standing for the last 2 hours. The way people stand when they've been reminded that the alternative to standing together is not standing at all. 20, Mira said. Yeah, put it in writing. She picked up her coin. She rolled it across her circles once, left to right, to left, and then closed her fist around it and went to help with the passenger offload. Darek fell in beside her, Kira on the other side. Corridor was narrow, but 3 people walking in the same direction fit just fine. The inquiry took 11 days. On the second day, Technical Objection 14 was formally entered into the record. On the 5th day, the authority's engineering division presented the complete analysis of Amendment 7C, including the secondary resonance findings that had been classified as internal documentation for 23 years. On the 7th day, 3 members of the original design review panel, all Vethkai, all still active in the authority, gave testimony that could be summarized if you stripped out the formal procedural language. As we knew, and we thought it didn't matter, and we were wrong about the speed envelope. On the 9th day, Dor Melvin testified. He was quieter than Mira had expected. Not subdued, not broken, but quieter in the specific way of someone who has received an answer to a question they asked a very long time ago and is still in the process of deciding what to do with it. She watched him from the witness gallery. He had the same 11-fingered hands as the station master, the same amber eyes, but where the station master's fingers were in constant fluid motion, Melvin's were still, completely still, the stillness of a person who has stopped waiting for something. When the inquiry chair asked him to describe the intent of the operation, he said,
I wanted them to know they were wrong.
The chair asked if he'd achieved that. He looked at his hands. Then he looked across the chamber at Mira. Someone read the objections, he said, all 19. The chair noted this for the record. Mira did not look away. On the 11th day, the panel issued its findings. The criminal findings were separate from the technical findings, and the criminal findings were straightforward. Melvin would face charges. Melvin would answer for what he'd done, and the formal legal process would take its course. Technical findings were something else. The Cassini corridor speed envelope was formally reduced to 400 kilometers per hour pending upgrade of the gap-crossing pylon structure. The upgrade specification was assigned to a joint Human Vethkai Engineering Commission. The commission's terms of reference included, as Exhibit 1, Technical Objection 14, filed by Dor Melvin 23 years prior. In a footnote that took Mira 3 readings to find, it was in Appendix G of the findings document, which most people were not going to read. The panel noted that the Global Rescue Initiative's Phoenix Wing had acted without formal authorization and in contravention of established cross-jurisdiction protocols, and that this unauthorized action had prevented the loss of 411 lives, and that the Oversight Committee was formally requested to consider whether the protocols themselves required revision. She read that footnote 4 times. Then she drafted a response. Then she drafted a formal request to the Oversight Committee for review of the cross-jurisdiction emergency protocols. Then she numbered it. Objection 20. Kyra was the one who pointed out, 3 weeks later, that the Oversight Committee had formally acknowledged receipt. Not responded, not acted, but acknowledged, which was more than 19 had gotten. It's a start, Mira said. It's a bureaucratic courtesy acknowledgement. Everything starts somewhere. They were back at Callista Station. The Helix Express was running again, back on schedule, back on the corridor, running at the new speed limit, which was still fast enough to feel like flying when you stood on the platform and watched it go. The station master was there, as he was most mornings, and his 11 fingers were moving in their constant overlapping patterns, reading or composing or processing the universe. He saw Mira. He didn't wave. That wasn't how Vethkai acknowledged people. They had a different gesture, a slowing of the finger movement, a slight angling of the amber eyes. She'd learned to read it over the last 3 weeks. She nodded back. Simple as that. 2 species in a corridor that was too narrow for comfort and just wide enough for coexistence, finding the specific configuration of gestures that meant, I see you, I know you were here. Something important happened in this place. The Helix went through the station and out the far side, and its passage stirred the air on the platform, and Mira felt it move through her hair and past her face. and she watched it go until it was just a thermal signature on Kyra's wrist display, a point moving fast through stone. "You know what's in Appendix D of the Corridor Agreement?" Darak asked. He was eating again. He was always eating. "I know what's in Appendix D. I read it last night." He folded the foil packet. "There's another clause. Appendix D, Section 12. Emergency Biological Support Protocol. It covers search and rescue operations for non-rail incidents in the corridor, including geological events." He paused. "Phoenix Wing is listed as the primary authorized responder. No confirmation protocol. Immediate deployment authorized." She looked at him. "Someone negotiated that clause," Hess said. "About 15 years ago. It's not a recent addition." She turned the coin over in her fingers. "Who?" He showed her the signatory line on his comm screen. The name was a Vethkai one, long and precisely structured, and beneath it was a translation note. The translation read, "Station Master, Callista Intermodal Hub." Mira looked across the platform to where the station master stood, fingers moving, watching the corridor. He angled his eyes very slightly. She rolled the coin across her knuckles, left to right to left, and put it away. The next helix was due in 14 minutes. She had reports to write and objections to file, and a commission meeting in the afternoon about pylon resonance specifications. And somewhere, in the Cassini corridor, the stone walls were exactly as close together as they'd always been, and the drop was exactly as significant as the survey report said, and the shelf of rail that ran between them was a little bit wider than it used to be because someone had taken the time, years ago, to negotiate an appendix. She went to find some coffee. Darak was already walking toward the station cafe, because of course he was. Kyra was on the comm, running preliminary numbers on something, fast music playing from her earpiece, propulsive and unrelenting. They walked through the station together, the three of them, not talking, and around them the morning moved in all its ordinary textures. The specific smell of a transit hub, machine oil and recycled air, and something that was probably food, the sound of announcements in 3 languages, the movement of people who needed to get from one place to another and trusted that the infrastructure would hold. It would. Mira would make sure of it. She always did. Not because she'd been authorized. Not because the protocols allowed it. Not because 19 formal objections had finally cleared the confirmation process. But because someone had to read all the way to Appendix D, and she was stubborn enough to do it.